I found the folder 3 days after I said yes to marrying a man I'd known for exactly 6 weeks. My hands were shaking as I held it. My name was printed on the cover in neat, clinical letters. Sarah Mitchell, background investigation. Inside were pages, dozens of them. Background checks, social media archives printed out and highlighted with yellow marker. My credit report with red marks next to items labeled concern. Bank statements, rent payment history, photographs of my apartment building in Queens, photographs of my parents' house in Pennsylvania. There was a full family tree. My father, Michael Mitchell, listed with his business credentials and net worth estimate. My mother, Patricia, with notes about her teaching position and family connections. My brother, marked as potential financial burden, student loan debt, $180,000. There were notes in the margins, handwriting I recognized. Darius's handwriting. Confirm education credentials. Double check with Rutgers registrar. Check family background. No significant wealth or connections. Verify financial stability. Appears stable but debt-heavy. But here's the thing nobody tells you about falling in love with someone powerful. They don't just love you. They investigate you. They verify you. They make absolutely certain you're worth the risk before they give you their name, their resources, their future. And sometimes, even after they've proposed on one knee with a ring that cost more than your annual salary, even after they've told you they love you in front of his entire extended family, they keep investigating. Because the question becomes, am I marrying a man who loves me, or am I marrying a man who loves the idea of me, as long as I fit within the parameters he's decided are acceptable? This is the story of how I found out the answer, or rather, how I learned that the answer was far more complicated than I ever imagined. It started in a gallery in Manhattan on a Friday night in September that was supposed to be completely insignificant. I was invisible. That's what I told myself anyway. It wasn't a metaphor. Being a hospitality coordinator at Elevate events meant that you literally made yourself invisible. You dressed in black, you moved through rooms with purpose but without presence. You smiled when asked to smile, refilled glasses when they were empty, disappeared into kitchens when you weren't needed. You became a functioning part of the infrastructure without being a functional person yourself. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 29 years old. I have a bachelor's degree in art history from Rutgers University, a degree that my parents had funded with equal parts financial contribution and emotional concern, assuming that loving art would naturally translate into employment in the art world. It hadn't. The art world was a closed system, accessible only to people with connections, inherited wealth, or the particular kind of whiteness that came with a long family name and a summer home in the Hamptons. I had none of these things. Instead, I worked for Elevate Events, a company that specialized in high-end catering for Manhattan's art crowd. Marcus Chen owned the company. He was 35, Korean-American, perpetually tailored in ways that made you suspect he had money beyond what the catering company generated. He had the kind of smile that worked on people who didn't know him. I'd known him for 3 years. His smile hadn't worked on me since the middle of year 1, when I realized that his charm was strategic rather than genuine. What hospitality coordinator actually meant was that I dressed in black pants and a black blouse, the uniform of service, the outfit designed to make you blend into walls and architectural features. And I moved through rooms, making sure that other people could enjoy themselves while I slowly, systematically died inside. It was a Friday evening, September. That particular time of year in New York, when summer is officially over, but the heat hasn't quite released its grip on the city. The gallery was in Tribeca, one of those converted warehouse spaces that cost more to rent per month than I made in a year. The walls were steel gray, the kind of gray meant to be sophisticated, but mostly just looked sad and expensive. The floors were polished concrete, cold and unforgiving. There were exactly 6 light fixtures positioned with mathematical precision, each one probably costing more than my monthly rent. The event was supposed to be a private viewing of something called the Okonkwo Collection. I'd looked it up before arriving. Apparently, it was a major exhibition by an artist I'd vaguely heard of from my art history classes. The kind of artist who was important to people who had money. The kind of artist whose work went up in value the moment it was declared important by the right galleries. "Sarah, more champagne over here," came Marcus's voice at around 9 p.m., and I turned with the tray. The champagne wasn't champagne. The gallery owner, a man named Robert, who had the kind of face that suggested a lifetime of inherited privilege, had been very specific about that. "We need to keep costs manageable while maintaining the impression of expense," he'd said, which meant he wanted to charge $250 per glass for something that cost approximately $3 per bottle. The sparkling cider looked almost identical to actual champagne in the delicate flutes, all fizz and bubbles and the promise of something premium. It was a metaphor for my entire existence. Dressed up to look expensive, all sparkle with no actual substance. Necessary, but insignificant. I was weaving back toward the kitchen, hidden from the main gallery space behind a black partition that was meant to look sophisticated, but mostly just looked like a divider in a corporate office, when I felt it. Not a sound. Sound doesn't have to be loud to announce a shift in the fundamental structure of a room. It's more about pressure. Like the moment right before a storm breaks, when the barometric pressure shifts, and every creature in a 5-mile radius, even the ones that aren't consciously aware of their surroundings, recognizes that something fundamental has changed. The oxygen has been replaced with something heavier. The rules have shifted. The room had gone quiet. Not silent. The jazz music was still playing, people were still talking, but the quality of the sound had changed. It was the kind of quiet that happens when a room collectively holds its breath. My colleague Antoine emerged from behind the partition with an empty tray of his own. His eyes were wide, the way eyes get when they've just witnessed something that's disrupted the expected order of an evening. "Oh my God," he whispered, in that urgent way that men whisper when they've seen something they think is important. "Oh my God, Sarah. Don't look obvious, but there's a man who just walked in and—" "Is it someone famous?" I asked, not particularly interested. Famous people generally spent gallery events talking to other famous people, existing in their own ecosystem, while invisible people like me served them drinks that weren't really drinks. My question came out flat. The question of someone who had stopped expecting the world to surprise her a long time ago. "Sarah. Sarah, look," Antoine said, turning me around with a hand on my arm. And that's when I saw him. The first thing I noticed was that he was black. That shouldn't have mattered, but it did matter in this particular space. Of the approximately 70 people in the gallery, maybe 4 or 5 were black. And they were there for the same reason everyone else was. They had money. They understood the rules of the art world, and they knew how to exist in spaces where they might not be entirely welcome. But this man was different. He was tall. Not just tall in the way that some men are tall, which would have been simple. Tall in a way that made other people seem to shrink around him. The kind of height that could make a room feel smaller just by standing in it. His suit was charcoal gray, The kind of suit that whispered of custom tailoring. The kind of suit that suggested someone had measured him very carefully with mathematical precision and understood not just his physical dimensions, but his essence while creating it. It fit like it had been born on him, like the suit had been waiting its entire existence to find his body. No tie, just an open white collar against dark skin that seemed to glow under the carefully positioned track lighting. The kind of lighting that was designed to make you look like the best possible version of yourself. And he didn't need the lighting for that. His skin had its own luminescence. He wore a single piece of jewelry, a ring on his right hand, thick gold, something carved into the surface that caught the light and threw it back into the room like it was announcing something important. A signet ring, I realized. The kind of ring that meant something. The kind of ring that announced to the world that this person came from a place where rings meant something, where lineage meant something, where there was an entire infrastructure of meaning behind his appearance. But it wasn't his physical appearance that made the room shift, that made the oxygen seem to leave the space and get replaced with something thicker, heavier, more difficult to breathe. It was the way everyone else responded to him. A woman who'd been loudly proclaiming the genius of the exhibition, whose commentary had been so confidently wrong that I'd wanted to correct her, fell completely silent. A man I'd watched spend 20 minutes discussing composition fell back. Even Marcus, who ruled rooms like a king of a kingdom nobody had asked him to rule over, turned toward this man. And I watched as Marcus's face arranged itself into something carefully neutral, like he was suddenly aware that he was being evaluated. And the man, this impossible man in the charcoal suit, he moved through the crowd like they didn't exist. He didn't scan the room looking for important people to talk to. He didn't perform the social calculations that wealthy people perform. He simply walked toward the center of the space, toward the largest piece, the painting that was definitely not a Jackson Pollock. And he actually looked at it. Really looked. The way someone looks at something that contains meaning beyond the frame. The way someone looks at something that matters to them. In that moment, standing behind the kitchen partition in my black uniform, holding a tray of sparkling cider pretending to be champagne, I felt something shift inside me. I felt seen, even from across the room, even though his eyes hadn't found me yet. Then he looked up. His gaze moved from the painting to the room, and somehow, in a way I still don't fully understand, in a way that defied the laws of probability and social convention, his eyes found mine. There were 70 people in that gallery. I was wearing the uniform of service. I was the least remarkable person in the room. I was quite literally designed to be invisible. And yet, when his eyes found me, it was like he was looking at me across an empty space, like everyone else had simply ceased to exist in his field of vision. My breath caught, literally caught in my chest. My lungs forgot how to function for a moment. The world narrowed to just that connection. His eyes finding mine across a crowded room full of expensive people and expensive art. He was looking at me. Really looking at me. And in that moment, I stopped being invisible. Then Marcus appeared, stepping directly into the line of sight, his hand outstretched in greeting. "Mr. Okonkwo," Marcus said, his voice doing that thing where it became smooth and careful. "What an absolute honor. I'm Marcus Chen, and we're thrilled to have you here this evening. The Okonkwo collection is truly extraordinary, and we wanted to ensure you had a private—" The moment broke. The man turned back to the painting, and I was invisible again. But something had changed. Something fundamental had shifted in the way I understood myself. And I wouldn't understand the implications until much, much later. His first text came at 3 in the morning. I'd made it home to my one-bedroom apartment in Queens that I shared with 2 other women, changed into the oversized t-shirt I slept in, and climbed into my twin bed. My roommate Sophie was already asleep in her bed across from mine, and I could hear Jade moving around in her room down the hall, probably still awake, probably waiting to see if I'd text her about the event. I was almost asleep when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Sarah Mitchell, art history degree from Rutgers, lives in Queens, works in hospitality but serves champagne at galleries and understands real art. I would like to know more about how you see the world. Dio. I read it 7 times. Then I read it again. And again. Someone had gotten my phone number. Someone had looked me up somehow. Someone had noticed me in that gallery, had thought about me enough to investigate me, had texted me in the middle of the night like this was normal, like finding a woman across a crowded room and then tracking her down was just something you did on a Friday night. I should have been scared. I should have been creeped out. A stranger who goes to the effort of finding your phone number is a stranger who has crossed a line, a stranger that breaks rules. But all I felt was the same thing I'd felt in the gallery. Seen. Finally, seen. I didn't respond that night. That would have been too much, too open, too much like I was inviting something I didn't fully understand. I turned off my phone. I went back to sleep. And I spent the entire next day thinking about that one moment in the gallery. That one moment when his eyes had found mine and the world had rearranged itself. But in the morning, the first thing I did was turn my phone back on, and I read that message again. And I saved his contact. Darius. His name was Darius. 3 weeks. That's how long the messages went on. 3 weeks of texts and voice memos that gradually became the most important part of my day. He asked me what I was reading. I sent him photos of my current book, a biography of a West African textile artist and activist. He responded with a 10-minute voice memo explaining the historical context of her work, the significance of her contributions to contemporary African art, how his family's own collection had been influenced by her work. His voice was careful, educated, carrying an accent that was African but worn smooth by years of moving between continents and languages. He asked me about my day. I told him about serving drinks at an event where a woman in a dress that cost more than my monthly salary had asked me to recommend a good Pinot Grigio, and I'd ignored her, which had felt mildly revolutionary. He responded with a voice memo that was just him laughing for 30 seconds. Genuine laughter. The kind that made me feel like I'd done something worth doing. He asked me to meet him. Multiple times. Coffee first, then dinner, then just a conversation somewhere we can actually sit down and talk like adults instead of typing like teenagers at 3 in the morning. Every time I made an excuse. Work, classes I'd started taking online because apparently getting a degree once wasn't proof enough that I was foolish enough to get another one. Commitments to my roommates. The real reason was fear. Because once I met him in person, the fantasy would crack. He would see me in daylight, without the mystique of the gallery, without the strange power dynamic that had made him seem impossibly larger than life. He would realize that I was just a girl in a shared apartment, working catering jobs, trying to make sense of a degree that hadn't led anywhere. He would realize that I was ordinary. that I was average, that I was not worth the effort he'd already expended finding me. But on Thursday night, 3 weeks into our messages, I broke. "You have to go," Jade insisted, pulling on my arm. We were in my bedroom, the one I shared with Sophie. It was 7 p.m. I was supposed to meet him at 8 at a restaurant I'd had to look up. My hands were shaking so badly that Jade took the phone away from me before I could cancel. "It's stupid," I said, which was a lie I'd told myself approximately 400 times. "He's probably just bored. He's probably got women throwing themselves at him all the time." "And yet he's texting you," Jade said, pulling out clothes from my closet. "At all hours. Asking about your opinions on contemporary art. Sending you recordings of him, basically giving you a graduate-level thesis on West African cultural history and its place in global art movements. Sarah, that's not bored. That's interested." "He's a prince," I said, hearing the hysteria creeping into my voice. "He's literally royalty. He's on Forbes lists. His family probably owns half of Lagos." "And you have opinions about art that are informed by actual study," Jade countered, throwing a sweater at me. "Which, from what you've told me, is why he's interested in you. Now stand up. You're changing." 20 minutes later, after Jade had raided my closet and somehow assembled an outfit that didn't look like I was trying too hard, but definitely looked like I was making an effort, I was on the subway, heading into Manhattan. The restaurant was called Elu. I'd never heard of it, so I looked it up on my phone while on the train. Michelin-starred. French cuisine with African influences. Reservations required 3 months in advance. I looked at the price range and nearly got off the train. But apparently having Darius Okonkwo's name was enough to bypass all of that. He was waiting outside when I arrived. He was wearing a suit, charcoal, with a white shirt, no tie. And when he saw me step out of the car I'd taken from the subway station, he smiled. It was the smile of someone who was genuinely pleased to see me. Not the smile of someone performing attraction or assessing whether I was worth his time. "Sarah," he said, "you came." "I said I would," I replied, which was stupid because it was obvious that I'd come. I was right there, standing in front of him, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "You look beautiful," he said. And the thing was, he said it like it was just a fact. Not like he was performing a compliment, not like he was testing out a line. Just a simple statement, the way someone would say, "The sky is blue," or "It's cold out." I felt my cheeks heat. "Thank you." Inside the restaurant, seated at a corner table away from the main flow of the room, with menus in front of us that had no prices, because apparently that's how you know you're somewhere expensive, I made a decision. "I have to tell you something," I said, before the server had even left with our drink order. "I Googled you." Darius smiled. "And what did you discover?" "That you're a prince," I said, the words tumbling out. "Like, actually a prince. That you're on Forbes lists. That your family owns massive amounts of property in Lagos. That you studied at Cambridge. That your family has a charity foundation that distributes money to African artists. That the painting at the gallery, the one that first brought us together, was painted by your mother." I stopped talking, watching his face carefully, waiting for him to confirm or deny, or explain or make some kind of movement that would help me understand what was happening. "My mother," he confirmed, and something shifted in his expression. Sadness, maybe, or memory, or both. "She was an artist. She painted that work." "It's beautiful," I said. The way it fractures and reforms. The way she was asking that question about what happens to beauty when it breaks. Whether beauty in a fractured form is still beauty, or if the fracture creates something entirely new. Something that we don't have a name for yet. He reached across the table and took my hand. Just took it, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like we'd been holding hands for years instead of meeting for the first time in person. She passed away, he said quietly, 25 years ago, when I was 8 years old. The gallery was showing her work, and it meant I could see her again. Do you understand that? I could see how she saw the world, through her eyes, through her art. I squeezed his hand. I understand. We talked through dinner. We talked about his mother, about how he'd inherited her eye, but not her talent for translating that eye into art. We talked about how he'd spent his whole life trying to bridge the gap between the art world and the practical world, using family resources to preserve and promote African artists that the Western art establishment had forgotten about. We talked about my degree, about how I'd gotten it because I genuinely loved art and assumed that love would be enough to sustain a career. It wasn't. The art world was a closed system, and I was on the outside looking in. We talked about invisibility, how his position as an African royal, as someone not white and not male and not Western European, meant that even with all his wealth and power, there were spaces where he still had to prove himself, still had to justify his presence. How I was invisible because of the opposite reason, because I was too ordinary, too average, not wealthy enough or connected enough or remarkable enough. But you're not invisible to me, he said. And it was the kind of line that would have felt like a cliché if I'd read it in a book or seen it in a movie. But in the quiet corner of a Michelin-starred restaurant, with his hand still holding mine, with his eyes on my face, it felt like the truest thing anyone had ever said to me. We finished dinner around 10 p.m. The server was beginning to give us looks that suggested they needed the table back, and Darius took the hint. As we were leaving, a woman stopped us. Blonde, expensive-looking, wearing the kind of outfit that screamed old money and older connections. "Darius!" she exclaimed, air-kissing his cheeks in that way that wealthy women do when they encounter someone they know well enough to air-kiss, but not well enough to actually embrace. "I haven't seen you in ages. Are you in the city for the Whitmore auction?" Darius's hand tightened slightly on my waist. He'd placed it there as we were leaving the restaurant, like he was claiming me, like he wanted the world to know that I was with him. "No," he said politely. "I'm here for personal reasons." The woman's eyes moved to me. I watched as she took in my appearance, the outfit Jade had assembled, the fact that I was with Darius, the obvious question forming in her mind. Who is this? "This is Sarah," Darius said, before she could ask. "Sarah is a curator. She's developing a collection of West African contemporary artists, and I think you might want to meet with her. Sarah, this is Catherine Somerset. Catherine sits on the board of the Metropolitan Museum." I opened my mouth to correct him. I wasn't a curator. I wasn't developing any kind of collection. I was a woman who served champagne at gallery events and had an art history degree that had never led anywhere. But something in his expression stopped me. "Really?" Catherine said, suddenly interested in me in a way she hadn't been a moment before. "That sounds fascinating. Are you working with a specific gallery?" "We're in early stages," Darius answered for me, smooth as silk. but I think Sarah's vision is exactly what the art world needs right now. I'll have her send you her portfolio." After Catherine had left, after she'd given me her card and told me to be in touch, I turned to Darius. "What did you just do?" I asked. "I gave you a door," he said simply. "You can walk through it or not, but it's there." We walked for a while after that, moving through the quiet streets of the Lower East Side. It was past midnight, past the hour when the city belonged to regular people, when only the nocturnal and the working and the young and the in love remained on the streets. We walked and talked, and at some point, his arm moved from my waist to my hand, our fingers intertwining like it was something we'd been doing forever. "Stay with me," he said, when we reached a corner where the subway entrance was visible. "What?" I asked, thinking he meant the night, meaning all of it. "Stay," he said. "Not for tonight. I'm not proposing we rush into something like that. But stay. In the city. Give me time to know you. Give yourself a chance to know what you want. I have a feeling that what you want is bigger than serving champagne at gallery events." I couldn't just stay. I had a lease. I had roommates. I had a life, small though it was. And yet, as he was talking, I was thinking about my job, which was temporary. I worked gig-based events, nothing permanent, nothing that would notice if I disappeared. My degree was completed. My apartment was a shared sublet, flexible month to month. My life, when I thought about it honestly, was the kind of life someone lived when they were waiting for real life to start. "I'll think about it," I said. "That's not a yes," he observed. "No," I agreed. "But it's not a no either." He kissed me then. Just like that, right there on a corner of the Lower East Side, with the subway rumbling beneath our feet and the city spread out around us like a kingdom that belonged to him. He kissed me, and it felt like something fundamental was shifting, like the world was rearranging itself based on the pressure of his lips against mine. When he pulled back, he was smiling. "That's a start," he said. I took the subway home at 1 a.m. On the train, I reread all his texts. 3 weeks of conversation. 3 weeks of him slowly, methodically trying to know me. And I realized that he'd been testing something. Testing whether I was real or just a beautiful coincidence. Testing whether my brain worked the way my mouth had suggested it did that first night in the gallery. I had 1 week. That's what Darius proposed, in a follow-up text sent at 2:47 a.m., after I'd gotten home and sent him a message to let him know that I'd arrived safely. 1 week, the text read. Come to Lagos. Come to my home. Meet my family. See what your life could look like. And if, after that, you want to go back to Queens and pretend this never happened, I won't stop you. But I think you'll surprise yourself. I think you'll realize that you're capable of more than you've been allowing yourself to be. The thing was, it was insane. It was absolutely insane. I didn't know him. I'd spent 3 weeks texting with someone and 1 evening in person, and now he was asking me to fly to Africa, to meet his family, to put myself in a position where I was completely dependent on someone for everything: transportation, housing, food, safety. But my job wasn't waiting for me next week. I'd quit. In a text to Marcus the morning after that dinner. No notice, no apology, just, I'm done. My roommates were used to me disappearing. Our arrangement was flexible, month to month, built for instability. And there was something in the way Darius had said, "I think you'll surprise yourself," that made me believe it. That made me think maybe it was possible to be more than invisible. Maybe it was possible to be seen. I called him on Thursday morning. "I'll come," I said, without preamble. "To Lagos. For a week." "Yes?" he asked, and I could hear the smile in his voice, could picture his face lighting up with something that looked like relief and joy mixed together. "Yes," I confirmed. "But, Darius?" "If this is some kind of elaborate prank, if you're going to introduce me to your family and they're going to laugh at me, if this whole thing is some kind of game, I will personally—" "Sarah," he interrupted, still smiling. "You're going to meet my family, and my family is going to look at you and understand immediately why I couldn't stop thinking about you since the moment our eyes met in that gallery. And then they're going to try to figure out how to keep you." "That's very confident," I said. "I'm a very confident man," he replied. "It comes with being a prince. Also, I don't make mistakes about people." "You might," I said. "About me, I mean. You might make a mistake." "I don't think so," he said. "I saw you in that gallery, Sarah. I saw the real you underneath the uniform, underneath the invisibility. And I recognized it because I'm invisible too, in my own way. And I've been looking for someone who understood what that feels like. Someone real. Someone true. Someone like you." I closed my eyes, holding his words close, like they were something precious that could be taken away from me at any moment. "Okay," I said. "Okay, I'll come." The heat in Lagos hits you like a physical thing. It's not just warm, it's alive, pressing against your skin like the whole atmosphere has become a living entity that wants to be inside you, wants to merge with you. I stepped off the plane and felt it immediately, felt it wrap around me like a blanket I hadn't asked for, but couldn't escape. I felt my carefully curled hair begin to frizz within minutes. I felt my carefully applied makeup start to slip and run. And I didn't care. None of it mattered anymore. Because Darius was waiting at the arrivals gate. He was in a linen suit, cream-colored, and he looked like something that had walked off a screen designed specifically for fantasies. But more than that, he looked like he was expecting me. Like he'd known all along that I'd come. "Hello, Sarah," he said, and took my carry-on luggage from my hands like it was nothing, like his primary concern was making sure I was comfortable, safe, cared for. "Hello," I replied, feeling suddenly shy. We'd kissed on a New York street corner, but that felt like it belonged to a different world. This was Lagos. This was his home. This was real in a way that New York hadn't felt real. "Come on," he said, and led me toward the exit. The car was waiting outside, long and black and gleaming. A driver opened the door for me, and I slid into leather seats that were cold despite the heat outside. Darius settled beside me, and almost immediately his hand moved from the seat to my knee, a gesture of reassurance or claim, or both. As we drove through Lagos, I watched the city unfold outside the window. It was nothing like New York. It was chaotic and sprawling and full of color. Billboards advertising everything from phone companies to churches, street vendors on corners selling things I couldn't identify, buildings both ancient and ultra-modern standing side by side like they were having a conversation about the nature of progress. "Welcome to Lagos," Darius said, watching my face. the heartbeat of Nigeria. 30 million people. The most cosmopolitan city in West Africa. It's overwhelming, I said, watching the organized chaos pass by the window. That's because you're seeing it with fresh eyes, he replied. Let me show you my Lagos. The Okonkwo family home was in Ikoyi, on the island, which apparently was the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. It was a compound, really, multiple structures surrounded by high walls, with guards at the gates who nodded at Darius like they'd been expecting him. When I saw it, I felt something like panic in my chest. This was real. This was actual royalty. This was not the kind of thing that happened to girls like me. They're going to want to know everything about you, Darius said, as the car pulled through the gates. My siblings, my father, my aunts, my uncles, everyone has opinions, and they're not shy about sharing them. But I need you to know that what matters is what I think. And I think you're extraordinary. You don't even know me, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. You know that I think your mother's art is beautiful. You know that I have opinions about contemporary artists. You know that I like pineapple on pizza, and that I read 3 books a week, and that I'm terrified of flying. But you don't know me. You don't know if I'm a good person or a bad person, or if I've ever done anything mean to someone who didn't deserve it, or if I'm the kind of person who's capable of breaking someone's heart. Do you like pineapple on pizza? He asked. That's not the point, I said. Do you? He asked again, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Yes, I admitted. Aggressively. Unrepentantly. He laughed. See? Learning more about you already. And for the record, yes, I've met people who've lied about who they are. People who've performed versions of themselves until the real version was completely obscured. But I know a real person when I see one. And you're real. Everything about you is real. The family dinner was set up in a massive dining room that could have fit my entire apartment 6 times over. There were about 15 people around the table. Darius's father, who was an older, grayer version of Darius, with the same devastating smile and the same way of making you feel like you mattered. His siblings, 3 of them, ranging in age from 25 to 40. Their spouses, and various aunts, uncles, and cousins. Everyone was beautiful in that way that wealth and good genetics produce. I was introduced as Sarah. No context provided, no explanation, just, this is Sarah Mitchell, from New York. Sarah, this is my family. The questions started immediately. Where was I from? What did my parents do? What was my educational background? Why had I come to Lagos? Was I working? What were my intentions? I answered as best I could, aware that every response was being cataloged, analyzed, judged. I watched Darius's older sister, Zainab, assess me over her wine glass like she was evaluating a piece of art, looking for flaws, for signs of inauthenticity, for reasons to be skeptical. I watched his father nod thoughtfully as I explained my art history degree and my work in the art world. I watched his stepmother, his biological mother was the artist, I learned, and this woman was the woman who had raised him, smile at me with what might have been warmth or might have been the polite smile of someone meeting the latest in a long line of women their son had brought home. And then his youngest brother, Kwame, asked the question that made my heart stop. So, what exactly are you to Darius? The table went quiet. I started, unsure what the right answer was. His girlfriend? His date? His experiment? His temporary American diversion? Sarah is someone I'm getting to know, Darius said smoothly, his hand finding mine under the table. And I've asked her to spend this week with me so that I can show her my world, and so she can show me hers. There was a shift in the room. I watched as faces changed, as the tenor of the entire evening seemed to lift slightly. The work was important. The work was his mother's legacy. You were at the exhibition? His stepmother asked, and this time her smile was definitely warmer. The one showing Mama's pieces? I was, I said. I was working it, actually. I was serving drinks. But yes, I saw the paintings. And what did you think? She asked, and I realized this was a test. This was the moment where I could say the wrong thing, could reveal myself as shallow or uninformed or incapable of understanding the significance of what she was asking. I took a breath and answered honestly. I talked about the fracturing and reforming, about the way the work asked questions about beauty and trauma. I talked about the skill involved, the technical mastery combined with emotional honesty. I talked about how his mother had understood something fundamental about the nature of brokenness and how it could be transformed into something new. By the end of dinner, I was being offered a tour of the family's private art collection. By the time dessert was served, Darius's father had asked me detailed questions about my thoughts on the current state of contemporary African art and what I thought the future would hold. And by the time we left the dining room, I felt less like an outsider and more like someone who had passed some sort of test. You did well, Darius said, as we were leaving the house for an evening drive. He'd offered to show me the city at night, and I'd accepted, grateful to escape the intensity of the family gathering and the weight of their expectations. I was terrified, I said. I know, he replied. But you didn't let it stop you from being yourself. That's the thing about my family. They respect courage more than they respect wealth or status. They respect people who are real. We drove through Lagos as the sun set and the city transformed. The heat mellowed slightly and the colors deepened. The buildings turned gold and orange in the setting sun, and the whole city seemed to glow, like it was alive with something. We stopped at a viewpoint overlooking the ocean, and Darius took me to a small restaurant that served street food. I had jollof rice that was better than anything I'd ever eaten in my entire life, and plantains fried golden and crispy, and I felt something shift inside me. This was real. All of this was real. I want to show you something tomorrow, he said, as we were eating. Something that matters to me. What? I asked. It's a surprise, he said. But I think you're ready to see it. The next morning, Darius picked me up early. We drove for about an hour, moving away from the island toward the mainland, away from the gleaming buildings and into neighborhoods that felt more authentic, more real. The buildings here were older, the streets less manicured. People clustered on stoops and corners, street vendors called out their wares, and the energy of the city felt less curated and more genuine. Finally, we arrived at a building that looked like it might have been beautiful once. It was 3 stories, with faded blue paint and high windows. Darius led me inside. It was an art studio, and it was filled with paintings. Not valuable paintings, not the kind that would hang in galleries or fetch prices at auction, but paintings that were alive, that were full of movement and color and life. Paintings of faces, women's faces mostly, rendered in bold strokes and bright colors. There were landscapes that seemed to vibrate with energy. There were abstract works that asked questions the way his mother's work had. This is the studio, Darius said. It's a community art center. partially funded by my family foundation. We bring in artists from all over Nigeria, all over West Africa, and we give them a space to work, to teach, to develop their craft. We provide stipends so they don't have to work other jobs. We help them show their work. We help them believe that what they're doing matters. A woman emerged from one of the back rooms. She was perhaps 60, with gray hair pulled back into braids, wearing clothes covered in paint in a way that suggested she'd been wearing them while working for hours. "Darius!" she exclaimed, embracing him. "And who is this?" "Mama Ade, this is Sarah," Darius said. "She's visiting from New York. She's an art historian." Mama Ade's face lit up, and suddenly I was being pulled deeper into the studio, being shown paintings, being asked my opinions on technique and composition and meaning. And I realized that this was what Darius had wanted me to see. Not wealth, not status, not the trappings of royalty, but this: purpose, meaning. The way his family had used their resources to create spaces for artists that would have otherwise been invisible. "Your Darius is a good man," Mama Ade said to me, when Darius had stepped away to help another artist with a frame. "He comes here and he listens. He doesn't just throw money and disappear. He listens. He cares. He understands that what we do here matters."
"He's not really mine," I said, and it came out sadder than I intended.
"Not yet,"
Mama Ade said, with a knowing look that made my heart stop.
"But he will be if you're smart. Men like Darius are rare. They're rare because they have both power and kindness, and those things don't usually go together. The powerful are usually cruel. The kind are usually weak. But him, he's both. And he's chosen you, so you'd better be smart about it." That night, Darius took me to his apartment. Not the family compound, his own place in Victoria Island, overlooking the lagoon. It was modern and minimalist, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows. And it was, I realized, the kind of place where he was just himself. Not a prince, not a family member, not someone performing a role. Just Darius. "I want to show you something," he said, and he led me to a room at the back of the apartment. It was his studio. He painted, apparently, or he had at some point. The walls were covered with canvases, abstract works mostly, but with a distinct style. The same style as his mother's work, I realized. The same way of asking questions through fractured forms. "I studied art in university," he said, looking at the paintings like they belonged to a different person, someone he used to be. "I wanted to be an artist like my mother. But then she died, and my father needed me to step up, needed me to be the heir, needed me to be practical and strong and responsible. And I put the paintbrushes down. I haven't picked them up in 15 years. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because you're the first person I brought here since I stopped painting," he said. "And I want you to understand that I understand what it feels like to have something inside you that you can't express. To have a degree, to have talent, and still feel like you're not enough. To feel like you have to choose between being yourself and being what the world needs you to be." He stepped closer to me. "But I think I'm starting to remember why I loved it," he said. "I think I'm starting to remember that even if you can't be the thing you wanted to be, you can still honor what it means. By supporting others, by helping create spaces where others can be what they're meant to be. Are you saying I should stop trying to be a curator? I asked carefully. I'm saying, he said, that Catherine Somerset from the Met sent you an email this morning about a position, a junior curator role, specifically focused on developing African contemporary artists for their collection. She remembered you from when I introduced you at that restaurant. Are you going to open that email? Or are you going to keep telling yourself that you're not worthy of it? My heart had started beating very fast. How did you— I didn't do anything, he said. You did. You impressed her. She was already interested. She just needed a reason to reach out. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and opened the email. It was there. A job offer, with a salary that was 3 times what I made doing catering, with benefits and a title and respect. And it was all because Catherine Somerset remembered me. It was all because I'd been brave enough to meet a man I didn't know, to get on a plane, to show up authentically. Take it, Darius said softly. I don't know if I'm qualified, I said. But even as I said it, I knew I was. I knew that I understood art in a way that most people never would. I knew that I cared about the artists, about the work, about what it meant. You are, he said. I've seen you in action. I've heard you talk about art. You understand it in a way that most people never will. And you care about the artists, about the work, about what it means. That's what makes a good curator. Not credentials. Caring.
I wrote the acceptance email right there, standing in Darius's apartment, overlooking the Lagos Lagoon, with his arm around me. And I felt something inside me shift. This was my life now. This was who I was going to be. We spent the rest of that night on his balcony, watching the city lights reflect in the water. We talked about my new job. We talked about what I wanted to accomplish. We talked about his mother, about how he hoped she'd be proud of him, of what he'd built, even if it wasn't art itself. And around midnight, Darius said something that made my breath stop. I love you, he said simply. Not dramatically, not with flowers or music or any of the apparatus of romance. Just a simple statement, like he was telling me something obvious, something true. I turned to look at him. You can't, I said. You don't know me. I know you better than I've known anyone, he said. I know that you love art, but you were too afraid to pursue it because you didn't believe in yourself. I know that you're intelligent and thoughtful and real. I know that when you talk about things that matter to you, your eyes get bright. I know that you're braver than you think you are, and that you deserve to be seen. And I love all of that. I love you. We've known each other for 3 weeks, I said. But I was crying, and my voice was shaking. I know, he said. And I'm going to know you for the rest of my life, if you'll let me. What are you saying? I asked, even though I knew. He pulled something from his pocket, a ring, not ostentatious, but definitely expensive. White gold with a diamond that caught the light and threw it back into the night sky. A simple band that spoke of quality rather than quantity. I'm saying, I want you to stay, he said. Not for a week, forever. I'm saying, I want to marry you. I'm saying, I want to build a life with you. And I want you to curate the most important African art collection in the Western Hemisphere.
I'm saying I want to introduce you to the world as my wife, not my girlfriend, not my companion. My wife."
"You're crazy," I said.
"Absolutely," he agreed. "Completely insane. But you're the kind of person worth being insane for. So, will you marry me?" And I should have said no. I should have said this was too fast, too intense, too much. I should have said we needed to get to know each other better, have more time, build a foundation. I should have said all the rational things that someone in my position would say. But I said yes instead. I found the folder 3 days after I said yes to marrying Darius. We were still in Lagos. We'd told his family the night before, announced it at dinner, and I'd watched as his family had reacted with the kind of controlled enthusiasm that comes from both genuine happiness and significant reservations. His father had pulled me aside after dinner and told me that I was welcome, that he was happy for his son, and that he hoped I understood the weight of what I was taking on. I was packing my things, preparing to leave the next day, when I decided to walk through Darius's apartment one last time. I wanted to remember everything about it. The way the light came through the windows in the morning, the view of the lagoon, the way it felt to exist in a space where Darius was just himself. His office was at the back of the apartment. It was a room I hadn't spent much time in. It seemed somehow private, somehow separate from the rest of the apartment. But the door was open, and I stepped inside. It was a beautiful room. Minimalist, like the rest of the apartment. A desk made of dark wood, bookshelves, windows overlooking the water, and on the desk, just sitting there like it was nothing, was a folder. My name was on the cover in neat, clinical letters. Sarah Mitchell, background investigation. I don't know what made me open it. I don't know what made me betray his privacy in that way. But I did. And inside were pages. Dozens of them. Background checks from 3 different agencies. My social media archives printed out and highlighted with yellow marker where he'd apparently found something interesting or concerning. My credit report with red marks next to items labeled concern. Bank statements showing my account balances, my deposits, my withdrawals. Rent payment history. Photographs of my apartment building in Queens. Photographs of my parents' house in Pennsylvania. There was a full family tree. My father, Michael Mitchell, listed with his business credentials and net worth estimate, $425,000. My mother, Patricia, with notes about her teaching position and family connections. My brother, marked as potential financial burden, student loan debt, $180,000. There were notes in the margins. Handwriting I recognized. Darius's handwriting. Confirm education credentials with Rutgers registrar. Double-check employment history. Check family background. No significant wealth or connections. Verify financial stability. Appears stable but debt-heavy, particularly family. Investigate roommate situation. Are these people legitimate, or is she fleeing from something? Research her parents' marriage. Divorced 2003. Any ongoing financial obligations? Financial irregularities noted. Student loan in default for 6 months in 2018. Currently on modified payment plan. Medical debt from 2015, $8,000. Why medical debt? Check health history. And, at the very bottom, in Darius's handwriting, recommend proceeding with caution. Subject appears genuine, but recommend ongoing monitoring of financial situation and family connections before committing to long-term relationship. Suggest background checks be continued post-engagement. When Darius came back into the office, he found me standing there, holding the folder, and I watched as his expression changed, as he realized what I'd found, as he understood that I now knew what he'd done.
Sarah, he started to say. You ran a background check on me, I said quietly.
Yes,
he said, and he didn't try to deny it.
I did.
Why?
Because I'm a man with significant resources and family obligations, he said carefully. And I had to know that you were real, that you weren't a con artist or a gold digger or someone who was going to betray me. I had to know you were trustworthy.
So this wasn't about love at first sight, I said, the words coming out hollow. This was about you investigating me until you decided I was worthy.
No, he said sharply. I fell in love with you that night in the gallery. I took your hand and I knew. But I'm also a businessman. I had to verify that what I felt was based on something real.
Did you find anything? I asked. Anything in your investigation that made you doubt me? He hesitated, just for a moment, but I saw it.
What? I demanded. There were some financial irregularities, he said, in your credit report. A student loan that was in default, some debt you'd accumulated. I had to make sure.
You had to make sure what? I was crying now, angry tears.
You had to make sure I wasn't secretly a criminal? You had to make sure I was worthy of your royal blood?
Sarah, he said, and he was moving toward me.
I'm sorry. I handled this wrong. I should have asked you about the financial situation instead of investigating it.
You should have trusted me, I said.
You should have loved me without needing to verify that I was the right choice. That's what love is. That's what trust is.
Sarah, he started to say.
You ran a background check on me,
I said quietly.
Yes, he said.
And he didn't try to deny it.
I did.
Why?
Because I'm a man with significant resources and family obligations, he said carefully. And I had to know that you were real, that you weren't a con artist or a gold digger or someone who was going to betray me. I had to know you were trustworthy.
So this wasn't about love at first sight, I said, the words coming out hollow. This was about you investigating me until you decided I was worthy.
No, he said sharply. I fell in love with you that night in the gallery. I took your hand and I knew. But I'm also a businessman. I had to verify that what I felt was based on something real.
Did you find anything? I asked. Anything in your investigation that made you doubt me? He hesitated, just for a moment, but I saw it.
What? I demanded. There were some financial irregularities, he said, in your credit report. A student loan that was in default, some debt you'd accumulated. I had to make sure. You had to make sure what?
I was crying now, angry tears.
You had to make sure I wasn't secretly a criminal? You had to make sure I was worthy of your royal blood?
Sarah, he said, and he was moving toward me.
I'm sorry. I handled this wrong. I should have asked you about the financial situation instead of investigating it.
You should have trusted me, I said.
You should have loved me without needing to verify that I was the right choice. That's what love is. That's what trust is.
3 months later, I was still thinking about him. I was still opening his emails, though I hadn't responded to most of them. I was still listening to voice memos he'd sent, his voice talking about his day, asking about mine, telling me he missed me. I was still wearing the ring, even though I'd never officially said yes to the engagement after finding that folder. I was also, and this was the part that terrified me, beginning to understand why he'd done what he'd done. Not because it was right, it wasn't, but because the world he existed in required that kind of verification. The world he lived in was full of people who would try to use him, betray him, leverage his family name and resources for their own benefit. He hadn't been investigating me because he didn't love me. He'd been investigating me because he loved me, and he needed to know that love was safe. It was a Sunday when I finally called him. He picked up on the first ring, like he'd been waiting, like he already knew it would be me. "Hello, Sarah," he said, and the 3 months of separation collapsed into nothing. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry I ran away. I'm sorry I didn't let you explain." "I'm sorry I didn't ask before investigating," he said. "I'm sorry I made you feel like your worth needed to be verified. You were never anything but extraordinary to me. Sarah, I'm getting on a plane to New York, and I'm going to show you that the man you fell for is still here. And I'm going to propose to you again, properly this time, with your full understanding of who I am and what I'm asking. And then, if you'll have me, you're going to marry me." "What if I'm not enough?" I asked, and it came out as a whisper. "What if I become enough for a while, and then I'm not? What if you're waiting for me to disappoint you?" "I'm not," he said. "But if I'm not sure, I'll spend every day for the rest of my life showing you why you are enough. I'll paint that proof on canvas, the way my mother did. I'll build institutions around it. I'll dedicate my entire existence to making sure you know your worth." He arrived on Tuesday. He proposed on Thursday, in the same gallery where we met, in front of his mother's painting, in front of the very piece that had brought us together. And this time, I said yes, with full knowledge of who he was, what he was asking, and what it would cost. We're getting married in 6 months, a ceremony that will happen simultaneously in Lagos and in New York, combining both families, both worlds. I'm going to be Mrs. Darius Okonkwo, which sounds like a fairy tale until you realize that fairy tales are just ordinary love stories where someone finally sees you. But here's the thing that I'm still wondering about, the thing that keeps me up at night sometimes. When I was cleaning out my apartment before moving in with Darius, I found something. Another folder. Similar to the one I'd found in Lagos, but more recent. Updated. From the private investigator that Darius had hired. It was dated 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks after he'd proposed the second time. 3 weeks after I'd said yes. Inside was the standard information. My financial status, updated. My job at the Met, verified. My living situation, confirmed. And more detailed notes about my family. But at the bottom, in Darius's handwriting, recommend full vetting of family connections before marriage. Mitchell family shows financial irregularities that should be monitored. Possibility of future requests for money from parents' extended family. Recommend continued quarterly reviews post-marriage to assess any changes in family financial situation or obligations. I never asked him about it, and he never asked me why I didn't confront him about it. So the question becomes, am I marrying a man who loves me?
Or am I marrying a man who loves the idea of me, as long as I fit within the parameters he's decided are acceptable? Am I being seen? Or am I being curated? I suppose I'll find out. We get married in 182 days. And somewhere in Lagos, Darius is probably commissioning another background check, just to be safe.